The screen of my phone glowed mockingly in the darkness of my bedroom, displaying a balance I couldn't comprehend. $12.47. Just yesterday, there had been over $40,000 in my account. Every penny I'd saved since I was 16. My hands trembled as I refreshed the app again and again, hoping it was just a glitch. My name is Caroline, and I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I was wrong. A notification popped up, a text from my mother. "Honey, we borrowed some money for Claire's wedding. Don't worry, we'll pay you back once everything settles down. This is for the family's joy." The room started spinning. I grabbed my keys and drove to my parents' house, still wearing my pajamas. The lights were on despite it being 11 p.m. Through the window, I could see Mom and Claire hunched over bridal magazines at the kitchen table, giggling like schoolgirls. I burst through the door without knocking. "What did you do?" Mom looked up, her smile faltering slightly. "Caroline, what are you doing here so late?" "My money," I said, my voice cracking. "How did you even access my account?" Claire's eyes widened. "What's going on?" "Your sister's being dramatic," Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. "We needed the money for your wedding venue deposit. The Riverside Garden books up years in advance, and they had a last-minute cancellation." $40,000? I couldn't keep the tremor from my voice. "That was everything I had." "Oh, please," Mom rolled her eyes. "You're always so selfish. This is your sister's special day. Besides, you're not even dating anyone. What were you saving for?" "My future. My independence. Maybe my own wedding someday." The words came out in a rush. "You had no right?" Dad appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes. "What's all the shouting about?" "They stole my money," I said, turning to him. "Dad, they cleaned out my account." "Borrowed," Mom corrected. "And we're co-signers on that account, sweetheart. We've always had access." "The account I opened when I was 16, I said slowly. "The one you were supposed to remove yourselves from when I turned 18. Remember that conversation?" Dad at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Mara, we should have discussed this with Caroline first." "There wasn't time!" Mom stood up, spreading her arms. "The venue needed an answer today. Do you know how many people would kill for a June wedding at Riverside Garden? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Claire." Claire finally spoke up. "I didn't know it was Caroline's money." "Of course you didn't," I spat. "You never have to know where anything comes from. Everything just magically appears for precious Claire." "That's enough." Mom slammed her hand on the table. "I won't have you ruining this special time with your jealousy. The money will be repaid after the wedding." "After the wedding?" I laughed bitterly. "With what? The money you don't have? Is that why you stole from me in the first place?" "We did not steal," Mom began, but I cut her off. "I worked 3 jobs through college. I saved every scholarship dollar. I lived on ramen while Claire got a new car for her 20th birthday. And now you take everything I've worked for without even asking?" "Caroline," Dad stepped forward, reaching for my arm. "Let's talk about this rationally." I jerked away from him. "Don't touch me. You're just as bad as she is. You always stand there and let her do whatever she wants." "I'm sorry," Claire whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't want it to be like this." "No," I said, backing toward the door. "You never want it to be like this. You just want everything handed to you and someone else to deal with the consequences." Mom followed me. "Where are you going? Don't be ridiculous. Come back inside and we'll discuss this like adults." I turned to face her one last time. Adults ask before taking something that doesn't belong to them. Adults respect boundaries. You're not adults, you're thieves. As I drove home, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from all 3 of them. I ignored them all. In my apartment, I sat in the dark, staring at the wedding invitation that had arrived last week. The elaborate script announced Claire and Trenton's perfect day at the prestigious Riverside Garden. My perfect sister, my perfect parents, their perfect lies. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Elise, I need your help with something." "It's almost midnight," my best friend answered groggily. "What's wrong?" "Everything," I said, my voice steady for the first time that night. "And I'm going to make them pay for it." Elise sat across from me at our usual coffee shop booth the next morning, her eyes wide as I showed her my empty bank account. They can't do this. It's illegal, right? Apparently they can, I said, stirring my untouched coffee. I called the bank. Since they're still co-signers, technically they had authorization. But you're 26. Why were they still? Because I trusted them. The words tasted bitter. I never thought they'd... My phone buzzed again, Claire's face lighting up the screen for the 10th time that morning. I declined the call. You have to answer eventually, Elise said gently. Watch me not. I switched my phone to silent. You know what the worst part is? Mom's already posting about the perfect venue on social media. Look. I showed Elise my mother's Facebook post. Dreams do come true. So blessed to announce Claire and Trenton's wedding will be at the prestigious Riverside Garden. Perfect day. Blessed mother. June wedding. The comments are making me sick, I said. You must be so proud. Claire deserves nothing but the best. If they only knew. The bell above the cafe door chimed and I froze. Dad walked in, scanning the room until he spotted me. Caroline, he said, approaching our table, you're not answering your phone. Funny how that works. Kind of like how you didn't answer when I tried calling about accessing my account yesterday. He shifted uncomfortably. I was in meetings all day. Right, important meetings. Always too important to stop Mom when she goes too far. I'll leave you two to talk. Elise started to slide out of the booth, but I grabbed her arm. Stay, please. Dad pulled up a chair. Your mother and I discussed it, and we understand you're upset. Upset? I laughed. Dad, you stole my life savings. Borrowed, he corrected automatically, then winced when I slammed my cup down. Stop saying that. You can't borrow without asking. You can't borrow what you can't repay. Where's this money supposedly coming from? He loosened his tie. We have some investments we can liquidate after the wedding. Investments? I leaned forward. What investments? Last month you were complaining about second mortgaging the house for Claire's grad school. We'll figure it out, he said weakly. Caroline, please. Your sister is devastated. She's been crying all morning. Good. Don't be like that. She's your sister. And I'm your daughter. My voice cracked. Several cafe patrons turned to stare. Did either of you think about that? Did you think about what this money meant to me? Of course we did, but sometimes families make sacrifices. No, I cut him off. Claire doesn't sacrifice. Mom doesn't sacrifice. You don't sacrifice. I'm the only one who ever has to give anything up. Dad reached across the table for my hand. I pulled back. Remember when I got into Stanford? I asked quietly. Full academic scholarship, but I still needed money for housing and books. Mom said we couldn't afford it. I went to state instead. 2 months later, Claire got her BMW. That was different. How? How was it different? He had no answer. Get out, I said. Caroline. Get out. He stood slowly, looking older than I'd ever seen him. We love you, both of you, equally. That's the biggest lie you've ever told. I turned to stare out the window, refusing to watch him leave. After the bell chimed again, Elise squeezed my hand. Are you okay? No. I pulled out the wedding invitation, running my finger over the embossed letters. But I will be. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about karma. I met her eyes, and how sometimes it needs a little help. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Please talk to me. I didn't know it was your money. I'll find another venue. No, you won't, I muttered, typing back. Keep the venue. You deserve your perfect day. I'll be there. Don't worry. Elise raised an eyebrow. That's surprisingly forgiving of you. I showed her my screen, where I'd pulled up Boston's Instagram profile. He was a social media manager I knew through mutual friends, and more importantly, he had over 100,000 followers. They want a perfect wedding? I smiled for the first time in 24 hours. I'll make sure everyone remembers it. Caroline, Elise warned, whatever you're planning. They took everything I had, I said, hitting the message button on Boston's profile. Now I'm going to take the only thing they care about, their precious reputation. The cafe bell chimed again. This time it was my mother, clutching her designer purse like a shield. I stood up, gathering my things. Not today, Mom. I've got a wedding to prepare for. You want me to do what? Boston leaned back in his chair at the trendy downtown bar, eyebrows raised. Make it go viral, I repeated, sliding my phone across the table. The bank statement was still open on the screen. I want everyone to know exactly how my sister's dream wedding is being funded. He whistled low. That's cold, Caroline, even for you. Colder than stealing someone's entire savings? Fair point. He took a sip of his beer. But have you thought this through? Once something's online, it's there forever. Good. I pulled out my notebook, flipping to a fresh page. I want it to be permanent. Hey guys! A familiar voice cut through the bar's ambient noise. My stomach dropped as Trenton, Claire's fiancé, approached our table. Trent, Boston stood to give him a quick hug. Didn't expect to see you here. Just grabbing drinks with some work friends. His eyes landed on me. Caroline, perfect timing. Claire's been trying to reach you. I've been busy, I said flatly. Listen. He pulled up a chair uninvited. I heard about what happened with the money. I had no idea. Save it, I cut him off. You're just as bad as she is. Living in your fantasy world where everything works out perfectly because someone else pays the price. His face reddened. That's not fair. I offered to help pay for the venue when I found out. With what? I laughed. Your entry-level salary? The same one you used to justify Claire paying for your dates all through college? Caroline, Boston warned. No. Let her finish, Trenton said, jaw tight. Clearly she's been holding on to this for a while. You're damn right I have. I leaned forward. You've been living off my sister's allowance for years, and now you're living off my stolen savings. You're a parasite, Trenton. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I came here to make peace. Claire's devastated. Your parents are trying to make it right. Why can't you just what? Roll over? Accept it? Like I always do? Maybe if you weren't so bitter about everything? Get out, I said, my voice deadly quiet, before I start telling everyone here exactly what kind of man you are. He left without another word. Boston waited until he was gone before speaking. Well, that was intense. He deserved it. Maybe. Boston picked up my phone again. But you might want to be more careful. Element of surprise and all that. He had a point. I took a deep breath, refocusing. So, will you help me? I don't know, Caroline, this is pretty nuclear. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Drop whatever you're planning. Some things should stay in the family. I showed it to Boston. See, they're already trying to silence me. He frowned. Who sent that? Probably one of Mom's country club friends. She's been telling everyone I'm having a mental episode. I rolled my eyes. Classic deflection. What exactly do you want to do? I pulled out the wedding invitation. June 15th, Riverside Garden. I'm going to stand up during the ceremony and tell everyone exactly how this wedding was funded. I want you to make sure it spreads beyond just the guests. That's specific. I've had time to think about it. I showed him my notes. I'll need multiple camera angles, live streaming capabilities, maybe even... Caroline? A soft voice interrupted. I looked up to see Elise, who was supposed to meet us later. You're early, I said. Yeah. She sat down, looking troubled. I just came from your parents' house. My stomach clenched. Why were you there? Claire called me. She's a mess, Caroline. She's talking about canceling the wedding. Good. Is it? Elise challenged. Will that get your money back? Will it make you feel better? Yes, I said, but my voice wavered. You're lying. She reached for my hand. I know you're hurt. You have every right to be. But this path you're on... Don't, I pulled away. Don't try to talk me out of this. I'm not. I'm asking you to think about what happens after. When the video goes viral, when the family's torn apart, when there's no going back, what then? My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Last warning. Back off. I showed it to them both. See? They're threatening me now. Still think I should back down? Boston and Elise exchanged looks. Actually, Boston said slowly, this might work in our favor. Keep those texts. Document everything. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. I smiled, feeling the first flutter of victory. So you'll help? He nodded. But we do this my way. Professional, calculated, no emotional outbursts. Deal. I raised my glass. To karma. To karma, he echoed, but Elise remained silent, watching me with worried eyes. I ignored her concern. There was no turning back now. Are you sure about this? Boston asked, adjusting the tiny camera hidden in what looked like a normal brooch. Once we start, there's no going back. We were sitting in his home office, surrounded by various pieces of recording equipment. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation at the bar, and the wedding was now just 10 days away. I'm sure. I pinned the brooch to my jacket, checking its position in the mirror. How's the audio quality? Crystal clear. He played back a test recording. But Caroline, these threatening texts you've been getting, maybe we should report them. I shook my head. They're just trying to scare me. Besides, we need them for the story. My phone lit up with another message from Claire. Just picked up my dress. Wish you'd been there. Miss you. I ignored it, just like I'd ignored the dozens before it. The bridal shower invitation, the rehearsal dinner details, the desperate voicemails. Your sister's really trying, Boston observed, watching me delete the message. She's really trying to pretend everything's normal, I corrected, just like always. The doorbell rang. Boston checked his security camera feed. It's Elise. She burst in moments later, waving a stack of papers. You're not going to believe what I found. What is it? I asked as she spread the documents across Boston's desk. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications. She pointed to highlighted sections. Your parents are completely underwater. They've been living on credit for years, trying to maintain their lifestyle. I leaned in closer. Where did you get these? I have a friend who works at their bank. She owed me a favor. Elise looked uncomfortable. What they did to you? It wasn't just cruel. It was desperate. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. All the more reason to expose them, I said. They're frauds. Caroline, Elise's voice softened. They're drowning. Maybe if you talk to them? No, I gathered the papers. This is perfect. Now we can show everyone exactly who they are. Boston cleared his throat. I've been thinking, maybe we should have a backup plan. What if someone tries to stop you during the ceremony? That's why I need you both there, I said. Multiple angles, multiple devices streaming. If I get shut down, one of you keeps recording. I don't know, Elise hesitated. This feels wrong. Wrong? I spun to face her. You know what's wrong? This bill for Claire's wedding dress. I pointed to one of the statements. $10,000. That's 2 months of my savings right there. For one dress she'll wear once. I'm not defending them, Elise said. But... A sharp knock at the door cut her off. Boston checked the camera and paled. It's your dad. What? I grabbed the documents, shoving them into my bag. How did he know I was here? Probably followed me, Elise admitted. I saw his car earlier, but thought I lost him. The knocking grew louder. Caroline? I know you're in there. Please, we need to talk. Boston pointed to his back door. Go, I'll handle him. I slipped out just as Boston opened the front door. From around the corner, I heard my father's voice. Where is she? Mr. Graham, Boston said firmly, this is private property. She's my daughter, who clearly doesn't want to speak with you. I texted Elise. Meet me at our backup location. 20 minutes later, we regrouped at a small cafe across town. Boston joined us shortly after. Your dad's gone, he reported. But he left this. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note. It's a start. Please let us make this right. I ripped both in half. Caroline, Elise protested. It's not about the money anymore, I said. It's about the lies, the manipulation, everything they've hidden for years while pretending to be the perfect family. Speaking of hiding, Boston pulled out his laptop. I've got the live stream set up ready. Multiple platforms, impossible to shut down completely. The moment you start talking, it'll go live. I nodded, touching the brooch. Good, and the audio? Crystal clear, like I said, but he hesitated. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? It's not too late to back out. My phone buzzed with another anonymous text. Final chance. Walk away or face the consequences. I showed them the message. See? They're still trying to control me, still trying to silence me. Well, not anymore. I stood up, gathering my things. The rehearsal dinner is in 3 days. I need you both there, testing the equipment, making sure everything works perfectly. And then? Elise asked quietly. And then, I smiled grimly, my sister gets exactly the wedding day she deserves. As I walked out, I heard Elise whisper to Boston, I'm scared for her. I'm scared for all of them, he replied. They should be, I thought. The perfect family was about to get a very public wake-up call. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for destroying my family's reputation. I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the pale blue bridesmaid's dress Claire had chosen months ago. The brooch camera was hidden perfectly among the beading. My phone lit up with a text from Boston. Equipment check at 9. Don't be late. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, only to find Elise waiting in the hallway. You shouldn't be alone today, she said simply. The drive to Riverside Garden was silent. The venue looked like something from a fairy tale, with its manicured lawns and cascading flower arrangements. A banner across the entrance read, Claire and Trenton's perfect day. Subtle, I muttered. Boston met us at the side entrance, laptop in hand. Testing. Camera 1, say something. I hate everything about this place. Audio's perfect. He checked his screen. Camera 2? Elise touched her necklace, another hidden camera. Testing. All systems go. Boston looked up. Last chance to back out. Before I could respond, my mother's voice rang out across the garden. Caroline! There you are! She hurried over, perfect makeup already in place, designer dress rustling. Why aren't you at the bridal suite? Claire's been asking for you. I needed some air. Well, come on. She grabbed my arm. The photographer wants pictures of the sisters getting ready together. I caught Boston's eye. He nodded slightly. The cameras were rolling. The bridal suite was chaos. Makeup artists, hairdressers, and Claire in the middle of it all, looking like a princess in her expensive dress, my stolen savings wrapped in white silk and lace. Caroline! She jumped up, eyes watery. You came. I'm a bridesmaid, aren't I? She hugged me tight. I've missed you so much. I'm so sorry about everything. Are you? I pulled back. Or are you just sorry I found out? Girls, Mom warned. Not today. Right, I smiled coldly. Today's perfect, just like everything else in Claire's life. The makeup artist approached with her brush. Ready for touch-ups? I'll do my own, I said quickly, not wanting anyone to notice the brooch. Claire caught my arm as I turned away. Can we talk? Please? Just for a minute? I followed her to a private corner, aware of the camera recording every moment. I tried to give it back, she whispered. The venue deposit, but they said it was non-refundable. How convenient. I'm serious. I feel terrible. Trenton and I even talked about postponing, but you didn't. Mom said it would be a waste. Of my money? She flinched. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Claire, but you're still going through with it. Because I love him. Tears welled in her eyes. And I love you. You're my sister. Please don't let this ruin everything. For a moment, just a moment, I wavered. Then my phone buzzed. Another anonymous text. Last warning, don't do this to your family. My resolve hardened. You should finish getting ready. Wouldn't want to ruin your perfect makeup. The next few hours passed in a blur of photographs, last-minute adjustments, and carefully orchestrated moments. Mom kept trying to create picture-perfect scenes of sisterly love, while Dad hovered anxiously in the background. Finally, guests began arriving. I watched from a window as Boston and Elise took their strategic positions, one near the front, one in the middle, both with clear views of the altar. 5 minutes, the wedding coordinator called out. Claire appeared beside me, radiant in her final moments of preparation. "How do I look?" "Like $40,000, I said quietly. She paled. "Caroline." "Places, everyone." The coordinator clapped her hands. "Bridesmaids, line up." As we took our positions, I felt my phone buzz one last time. Not an anonymous threat this time, but a message from Dad. "Whatever you're planning, please remember, you can't take it back." I deleted it without responding. The wedding march began to play. One by one, we processed down the aisle. I could feel Mom beaming from the front row, Dad looking nervous beside her. Boston gave me a subtle nod as I passed. Elise wouldn't meet my eyes. I took my place at the altar, watching Claire float down the aisle on Dad's arm. She looked beautiful, perfect, everything she'd always been and I'd never managed to become. The minister began to speak. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." My hand touched the brooch. In moments, everything would change. The perfect family would shatter. The perfect wedding would become a viral scandal. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, I took a deep breath. This was it. My moment of truth. Claire turned slightly, catching my eye. For the first time in weeks, I really looked at my sister, and what I saw made me hesitate, but only for a moment. "Actually," I stepped forward, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent church. "I do have a reason." Claire's face crumpled. "Caroline, please." "Everyone here thinks this is a perfect wedding," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "A perfect couple, a perfect family, but it's all built on lies." Mom stood up. "Caroline, stop this right now." "No, Mom, I won't stop. Not anymore." I turned to address the guests directly. "You want to know how this perfect wedding was funded? With stolen money? My money." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see Boston's red recording light blinking steadily. $40,000, I announced. Every penny I'd saved since I was 16. They took it all, without asking, without permission, to pay for this. I gestured at the elaborate decorations. Because heaven forbid Claire doesn't get exactly what she wants. "That's enough." Dad started moving toward me. "Is it?" I pulled out the bank statements Elise had found. "Should we talk about the second mortgage, the maxed out credit cards, all to maintain this perfect image?" "Security!" Mom called out. Two men in black suits started moving up the aisle. "Go ahead," I laughed. "Remove me, but you can't remove the truth. This whole thing is streaming live right now." Gasps echoed through the church. Phones started appearing in people's hands, already searching for the feed. "She's lying," Mom announced desperately. "She's just jealous of her sister's happiness." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, projecting screenshots of my bank account onto the wall using the church's presentation system. Boston's technical setup working perfectly. "Here's my account before and after, the same day they booked this venue." Trenton stepped forward. "Claire, did you know about this?" Claire's perfect makeup was streaking with tears. "I didn't know at first. When I found out, she knew," I cut in. "She always knows. She just pretends not to see the damage she causes." The security guards reached me. One grabbed my arm. "Touch me and it gets worse," I warned. "I have years of evidence. Every time they chose her over me. Every sacrifice I was forced to make while she got everything." "Stop!" Claire screamed. She ripped off her veil. "Just stop! You're right, okay? You're right about everything!" The church fell silent. "I knew," she continued, voice shaking. "I knew they took your money. I knew it was wrong. But I was scared to say no to Mom, scared to be anything less than perfect, scared to disappoint everyone like you always did," Mom gasped. "Claire." "No, Mom. Caroline's right. We're frauds. All of us." Claire turned to Trenton. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. I can't start our marriage with stolen money and lies." Trenton stared at her for a long moment, then walked out without a word. The church erupted in chaos. "Do you see what you've done?" Mom advanced on me, face contorted with rage. "You've ruined everything." "No, Mom. You did that. The moment you decided your image was worth more than your daughter's future." Dad finally spoke up. She's right, Mara. This has to stop. John, don't you dare. I'm done enabling this. He turned to the guests. My daughter is telling the truth. We stole her money. We've been living a lie, and I'm ashamed. The security guards released me, clearly unsure what to do in this situation. Phones were recording everywhere now. I could practically see the social media storm brewing. Caroline, Claire approached me, mascara streaking down her face. I know it's too late, but I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Behind the perfect facade, I saw something I'd never noticed before: fear. The same fear I'd lived with my whole life, of never being enough. It's not too late, I said quietly. It's just the truth. Finally. Mom collapsed into a pew, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Dad sat beside her, looking both defeated and relieved. Boston appeared at my side. It's trending already. Top story on 3 platforms. Elise joined us, her camera still recording. What now? I looked around at the destroyed wedding, the shocked guests, my broken family, the perfect day shattered by truth. Now, I said, unpinning the brooch camera. We stopped pretending. I walked down the aisle, past the whispers and stares, past the scattered rose petals and abandoned programs. At the door, I turned back one last time. Claire stood alone at the altar, still in her perfect dress, looking more real than she ever had before. Mom sobbed in the front pew while Dad stared straight ahead. The perfect family finally exposed. I stepped out into the sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth had cost me my family, but lies had already done that long ago. At least now everyone knew it. 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, my video had over 5 million views. Perfect family fraud was trending, and my inbox was flooded with messages from strangers sharing similar stories of family betrayal. You've got another interview request, Boston said, scrolling through his phone. We were sitting in his office, monitoring the fallout. Morning show wants you live tomorrow. No more interviews. I closed my laptop, pushing away from the endless social media storm. I've said everything I needed to say. My phone rang. Claire's number. I'd been ignoring her calls since the wedding, but this time something made me answer. Hello? I moved out, she said without preamble. I'm staying at a hotel. What about Trenton? He's gone. Said he couldn't trust me anymore. Her voice cracked. Mom's not speaking to me since I defended you to the local news. You defended me? Of course I did. You told the truth. Something I should have done a long time ago. A knock at Boston's door interrupted us. Through the security camera, I saw Dad standing outside, looking haggard. I have to go, I told Claire. Wait, can we meet? Please, I need to talk to you properly. I hesitated. I'll think about it. Boston opened the door. Dad stepped in holding a thick envelope. Caroline, he said, looking years older than he had at the wedding. We need to talk. About what? How the country club kicked you out? How Mom's perfect reputation is ruined? About this. He placed the envelope on the desk. It's everything we own. The house, the cars, our investments, what's left of them. We're selling it all. I opened the envelope, scanning the documents. Why are you showing me this? Because it's yours. He sat heavily in a chair. All of it. To sell and recoup what we took from you. Dad, no, let me finish. He pulled out another paper. Your mother doesn't know I'm here. She's not well. The exposure, the shame. She had a breakdown yesterday. My stomach twisted. Is she okay? She's getting help. Professional help. Finally. He smiled sadly. It turns out our perfect family had more cracks than even you knew about. Boston quietly excused himself, leaving us alone. I failed you, Dad continued. I failed both my daughters by enabling your mother's obsession with appearances, by not standing up when I should have, by letting fear of confrontation destroy our family. Why now? I asked. Why are you suddenly willing to admit all this? Because I watched that video, not just at the wedding, but afterward. I saw my daughter's face as she exposed our lies. I saw what we'd done to you, really saw it, maybe for the first time. My phone buzzed. Another message from Claire. I found my old diary. Remember when Mom made you give up your school play lead so I could have it? I'm so sorry. I have so much to make up for. Dad noticed my expression. Claire? Yeah, she misses you. He leaned forward. We all do, but we understand if you never want to see us again. I stared at the documents. The house isn't worth $40,000. No, it's worth much more. Along with everything else, it should cover what we took, with interest. And Mom agreed to this? Mom doesn't get a vote anymore. His voice hardened. I've separated our finances, filed for divorce, 27 years of enabling her ends now. Divorce? I sat back, shocked. But your perfect marriage was as fake as everything else. He stood up. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the property transfers, unless what? Unless you're willing to try family counseling first. All of us. No pretenses, no perfect image to maintain, just truth. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Elise. Have you seen the news? Your story's inspiring people to speak up about financial abuse in families. You're making a difference. I looked at Dad, really looked at him. The proud man who'd always hidden behind Mom's decisions was gone. In his place was someone I barely recognized, someone real. I'll think about it, I said finally. The counseling, but I'm keeping these. I picked up the documents. As insurance. He nodded. Fair enough? At the door he paused. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not for exposing us, though we deserved it, but for being strong enough to stand up for yourself. Something I never did. After he left, Boston came back in. You okay? No, I said honestly, but maybe someday. My phone lit up with a text from Claire. Remember when we were kids? Before Mom's perfect family obsession? When we were just sisters who loved each other? I miss that. I miss you. I stared at the message for a long time before finally replying. Coffee tomorrow? Just us. No perfect daughters, no pretenses, just truth. Her response was immediate. Yes, please. Thank you. Maybe some things broken could be rebuilt. Not perfectly, but honestly. And maybe that was better than perfect anyway. The coffee shop where Claire and I first met for reconciliation became our regular spot. Today, like every Wednesday for the past few weeks, she was already waiting at our usual table. You're late, she said, sliding my usual order across the table. Therapy ran long. I sat down, noticing the stack of papers beside her cup. What's that? My diary entries. I've been typing them up. She pushed them toward me. Every time I was chosen over you, every unfair advantage, every stolen opportunity. Claire, we've been through this. I know, but I need you to have them. For the book. I nearly choked on my coffee. What book? The one you should write. About financial abuse in families. About standing up to toxic patterns. She pulled out her phone. Look at these messages I got after sharing my side of the story online. The screen showed dozens of comments from people sharing similar experiences, siblings describing hidden resentments, children detailing stolen inheritances, families torn apart by financial favoritism. Your story matters, Claire said. Our story matters. The bell above the door chimed. Dad walked in, followed by our family therapist, Dr. Rivera. Sorry I'm late, Dad said, pulling up a chair. The realtor needed signatures. You sold the house? Claire asked. He nodded. Closing next week. Your mother's furious, but she signed the papers. How is she? I asked quietly. Better. The new medication helps. She's starting to understand what she did to this family with her obsession for perfection. He smiled sadly. She asked about you both yesterday, actually asked, not just demanded. Dr. Rivera opened her notebook. Shall we begin? Caroline, you wanted to discuss boundaries going forward? Yes. I took a deep breath. I've decided what to do about the money. Everyone tensed. I don't want the house proceeds, I said, or any of the other assets. Caroline, Dad started, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. I don't want revenge anymore. What I want is change. I pulled out my own stack of papers. I'm starting a foundation for victims of family financial abuse, to help them get legal aid, counseling, whatever they need to break free. Claire's eyes widened. That's amazing. I want to use what happened to us to help others, I continued. But I need your help, all of you, including Mom, when she's ready. How? Dad asked. By telling the truth, the whole truth. No more perfect family facade. No more hiding the ugly parts. I turned to Dr. Rivera. Would you help us develop a program? Something that addresses both the financial and emotional aspects? She smiled. I'd be honored. There's something else, Claire said, pulling out another paper. I found my old wedding dress receipt. I sold it yesterday. It's not 40,000, but... She slid a check across the table. Claire, please, let me start making things right. My phone buzzed. A text from Boston. Morning Show still wants that interview, but they want all of you. The whole story, from every angle. Interested? I showed them the message. It won't be pretty, Dad warned. People will judge us. They already are, Claire pointed out. At least this way we can help others while we heal ourselves. Dr. Rivera made a note. This could be very therapeutic, but only if everyone's ready. I looked at my father, who had finally found his voice. At my sister, no longer hiding behind perfection. At the empty chair where Mom might someday sit, facing her own demons. I'm ready, I said. Me too. Claire reached for my hand. Dad nodded slowly. Together then. No more perfect lies. I texted Boston back. Set it up. But make sure they understand. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about redemption. His response was immediate. That's an even better story. Claire laughed suddenly. Remember when all I wanted was a perfect wedding? Remember when all I wanted was revenge? I squeezed her hand. Maybe we both needed something else entirely. Truth, Dad said quietly. We all needed truth. Dr. Rivera closed her notebook. Same time next week? We nodded, standing to leave. Outside the coffee shop, Claire hugged me impulsively. Thank you, she whispered, for breaking our perfect family. We needed to break to become real. I hugged her back, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not for perfection, but for something better. Something honest. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother asked. She asked if she could watch the interview when it airs. Together. All of us. I met Claire's eyes, saw my own mix of fear and hope reflected there. Together, I agreed. But this time, we tell the whole truth. After all, real families aren't perfect. They're just perfectly honest about their imperfections. And finally, that's exactly what we were becoming.
Hello, I'm Patricia, a 32-year-old. My early years were shadowed by the loss of my mother, a wound that deepened my bond with my father, who single-handedly ensured my every need was met. This profound loss made me cautious about my emotions, and for a long time I thought I might remain single. But then I met Peter, a caring and persistent gentleman who is now 34. We were introduced by a friend who was concerned about my prolonged singlehood. After a year of gentle courtship, Peter proposed. Now, as we prepare for our upcoming wedding, I recall a distressing incident at our wedding reception. My in-laws, under the influence and oblivious to the murmurs of the crowd, confronted me publicly. They demanded that I prove my financial worth to the family by contributing $5,000 monthly as an additional support, which is half my salary, asserting that it was too late for objections since I was already marrying into their family. I was stunned by their audacity to voice such demands at what should have been a celebratory event. As I stood there, my face drained of color, my father intervened. Taking the microphone from them, he sternly reprimanded my in-laws, reminding them of the embarrassment they were causing themselves. This episode not only shocked me, but also reinforced the cautious approach I've always taken with my relationships. Despite the love and support from my father and Peter, navigating these family dynamics has been a new challenge for me. Peter and I began dating, and from the start, his kindness and attention made me truly happy. He became so significant in my life that I couldn't help but envision a future together. When he proposed, it was clear we were on the same path. Peter always knew just what to say to ease my doubts. "Don't worry if you're uncertain about something. I'll be here for you until you feel better. I love you, Patricia. You can always rely on me," he would assure me. His promises and presence brought a comforting warmth that only deepened my affection for him. When I shared the news of our engagement with my dad, his joy overflowed. He even shed tears. "Wow, Patricia, you're finally tying the knot. I'm over the moon for you," he exclaimed. We shared a lighthearted moment when I teased him for being so dramatic, a side of him I rarely saw. "I used to worry you might never settle down," he admitted. It was a surprise to hear his concerns, but it only showed his deep care for me. His warm congratulations meant everything, especially knowing the sacrifices he'd made raising me alone. As Peter and I dove into wedding planning, our lives were a whirlwind of activity. Our jobs filled our weekdays, and weekends were dedicated to organizing our big day. Free time became a rare luxury. Eventually, we found a day to visit Peter's parents for the first time since our engagement. Despite our hectic schedules, we were eager to visit happen. As we arrived at his parents' house, nerves fluttered in my stomach. Peter noticed and reassured me with a comforting smile. "Don't worry, my parents are really kind." His words eased my anxiety slightly as I rang the doorbell. It was Peter's mother who greeted us. "Mom, I'm home," Peter announced cheerfully. "Welcome home, Peter. It's so nice of you to come," she responded warmly to him. I followed with a polite introduction. "Nice to meet you. I'm Patricia, Peter's fiancée." Her initial warmth towards Peter cooled somewhat as she turned to me. The smile she offered was polite but lacked the warmth she had shown her son, and her gaze held a hint of scrutiny. This subtle shift in demeanor left me feeling slightly uneasy as we stepped inside. Peter's mother guided us into the living room, where her reserved manner persisted. With a tone more interrogative than conversational, she began, "Patricia, I'm curious about what you bring to the table. Peter is our treasure, our only child. If you're going to marry him, you must be suitable. Are you worthy of him?" Her directness caught me off guard. I hadn't expected such a frosty reception from my future mother-in-law, and found myself struggling to respond. "Remember, you'll be joining our family. Are you prepared for that?" she continued. While marrying Peter indeed meant becoming part of his family, the high expectations she placed on me seemed unreasonable. Peter's family wasn't a prominent or influential dynasty, and I wasn't even going to live with them. I disliked the pressure of these questions. As I pondered a response, she grew impatient with my hesitation and sharply scolded. "When I ask you a question, answer promptly. You're being rude." Her voice escalated as she pressed, "I want to know if you're ready for this." Feeling overwhelmed, I managed to reply, "I hope that Peter and I will support each other in our marriage." Her response was dismissive. "That's such a naive thing to say. Your job as a wife is to support Peter. You clearly don't understand the basics." Peter's father, sitting nearby, intervened. "Honey, please calm down." He apologized to me. "I apologize, Patricia. I hope you weren't too upset by my wife's words." "It's okay," I replied, trying to keep composed. I understood that Peter's mother was protective of her son and might have spoken out of haste. Just then, Peter's brother entered the room. His gentle tone momentarily eased my nerves until he added, "What my wife says has some truth to it. What concerns me is that you come from a single-parent family." Confused and a bit hurt, I asked, "What do you mean by that?" "Well, being raised by just one parent doesn't have a good public image. We can't exactly be thrilled about someone from such a background becoming our son's wife, can we? He elaborated. At that moment, I couldn't hold back. Wait a minute. What's wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked incredibly hard to raise me alone. I am ungrateful for my upbringing and proud of my father. Growing up with one parent doesn't diminish my worth. The room fell into a tense silence as I stood my ground, feeling the weight of their judgments yet firm in my values. Peter's parents had an old-fashioned perspective that was apparent as they questioned my capability to be a good wife, citing my upbringing as a single parent. They expressed doubts about whether I had learned the essential skills like managing household chores. I responded with conviction. I help my father a lot with household chores. I can also cook pretty well, so please don't make assumptions about me. Despite my clear explanation, they seemed to dismiss my words and proceeded to lay down conditions for our marriage. We'll allow you to marry Peter, but in return, you must promise to prioritize us because we are Peter's parents. Can you promise us that? They demanded. I was taken aback by their request. It felt more like a transaction than a blessing. Later that evening, I felt sidelined by their dominating attitude and decided to share my concerns with Peter. Hey, Peter, do your parents always talk to people like that? I asked, hoping for some understanding. Peter seemed unfazed. What's wrong with how they talk? I was surprised that Peter didn't recognize the issue. I mean, the way your parents talked to me and what they said, I explained further. Peter dismissed it casually. Oh, really? They were just discussing whether you're ready for marriage. I understand they're concerned, but I felt like their comments were a bit too much. I persisted. Peter's casual response surprised me. Really? What do you think they said wrong? They'd given us their blessing, so let's not dwell on it. Though I agreed outwardly, yeah, you're right. Inside, I couldn't shake off the unease that Peter seemed to align more with his parents than with me. It was deeply troubling. Sensing my discomfort, Peter tried to reassure me, pulling me into a hug. Patricia, you don't have to worry so much. My parents are just a bit upset because their only son is getting married, he explained. Though Peter's words were meant to comfort me, they didn't fully alleviate my feelings of being misunderstood and somewhat alone in this new family dynamic. I was left wondering how we would navigate our future together with such different expectations from his parents. Peter tried to ease the tension by suggesting his parents simply wanted what was best for us. They just want us to have a strong marriage like theirs, and that's why they might have come off a bit harsh, he explained. I tried to see things from his perspective, acknowledging that perhaps they held high expectations for us. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake off the discomfort caused by their criticism of my upbringing. I believe that our marriage should be about us and our mutual respect, not solely about seeking their approval. As I grappled with these thoughts, the wedding day arrived. It was a profoundly emotional moment to walk down the aisle with my father, who had raised me by himself. As Peter and I exchanged vows and rings to the sound of applause, I felt an overwhelming joy, realizing the significance of the commitment we were making. At the reception, the lively atmosphere and the congratulations from friends and colleagues made it a truly memorable day. Despite the initial misgivings about Peter's parents, the joy of the day made me glad we had gone through with our plans. After the ceremony, we looked forward to officially registering our marriage. The day was filled with cherished moments, but as we prepared to greet our guests, I noticed Peter's parents were visibly intoxicated, their behavior slightly erratic, which made me uneasy. During the reception, an uncomfortable moment unfolded when Peter's mother, a bit too forcefully, pulled me aside and in a commanding tone said, "Patricia, listen to me. After this wedding, you are going to dedicate yourself entirely to us. Get ready because we will test you rigorously." Some guests chuckled, thinking it was a joke. Shortly after, Peter's father took the microphone, glanced at me, and remarked, "Patricia, aren't you ashamed to wear a dress like that? It doesn't suit you at all." His tone was sharp, and Peter's mother added, "Dear, you should tell her the truth." The mood among the guests shifted. Whispers grew louder, some in disbelief, others in discomfort. I turned to Peter, hoping for his support, expecting him to address his parents' rude remarks. However, to my dismay, he remained silent, later saying he couldn't do anything about it and didn't believe his parents were in the wrong. This response was disheartening. It made me realize the challenges we might face as a couple, especially regarding his parents' influence and our differing perspectives on handling family conflicts. As we moved through the day, I knew this issue would need more discussion and understanding if we were to build a strong, unified future together. In the wedding hall's bustling atmosphere, a harsh reality struck me. Peter would not shield me from his parents' harshness in the future. The situation escalated quickly when my in-laws, under the influence and unabashed, continued to berate me with unreasonable demands. "Well, you're married now, but to be part of this family, you need to prove you have enough money," they announced, adding, "After you register your marriage, you should give us a few thousand a month and your entire bonus." Their words left me stunned. Such audacious demands at our wedding reception were the last thing I expected. As I stood there, my face pale, my father stepped in, his voice firm yet respectful as he took the microphone from them. "Enough of this. Don't you realize how inappropriate this is?" he challenged. Peter's parents shot back defiantly. "Why are you interrupting us while we're talking?" They sneered further. "I knew this woman's father was no good. Single parents are never any good." Angered by their cruel words toward my father, I felt my temper rising, but my father remained composed and responded, "You're even worse than I thought. Refusing to meet me just because I'm a single father is shameful." I never expected such bigotry from people associated with a respected figure. "I assume President Donald's employees would be more decent," my father continued. The mention of President Donald seemed to startle my father-in-law. "How do you know President Donald?" he asked, his tone shifting to one of concern. "He's a business partner of my company and, more importantly, an old friend of mine," my father clarified. He then added, "And speaking of single parents, President Donald himself was raised by his mother alone, so your comments have inadvertently insulted the president of the company you work for." As realization dawned on their faces, the gravity of their blunder became apparent. My father-in-law's demeanor changed drastically, from assertive to pleading as he dropped to his knees. "I apologize, sir. Please don't mention this to the president," he begged. His earlier bravado evaporated in the face of potential consequences. This sudden shift in their attitude marked a turning point in the evening, highlighting not only the thoughtlessness of their earlier remarks, but also the underlying respect my father commanded. As the night continued, I was left contemplating the complex dynamics of our newly extended family and the role I would choose to navigate within it. Amid the unfolding drama, my father-in-law looked utterly defeated, and the guests couldn't help but react, some with laughter, others capturing the moment on their phones. My dad, standing by his principles, replied firmly, "Apologies can't undo what's been said." He then approached me, asking quietly if I wanted to leave with him. I nodded, taking the microphone from Peter's hand. "Thank you all for the entertainment, but there will be no wedding," I announced resolutely to Peter, his parents, and all the guests at the reception. "I will ensure that the gifts and contributions for this occasion are returned." With those final words, I exited the hall alongside my father. As we left, I caught a glimpse of Peter and his parents, their faces marked by dismay, while their relatives quickly gathered around them, expressions filled with concern. The repercussions of that night were immediate. As I returned the gifts and explained the situation, many guests expressed their sympathy and commended my father and me for taking a stand against such unacceptable behavior. They appreciated our integrity in not allowing ourselves to be manipulated by such offensive demands. The incident didn't just leave a personal mark, it rippled through Peter's professional life as well. Colleagues who had attended the wedding began to view him differently, tarnishing his reputation due to his inability to defend me against his parents' unreasonable actions. The embarrassment became so overwhelming that Peter felt compelled to resign from his position. Moreover, the president of the company where my father-in-law worked got wind of the fiasco. The fallout was severe. Peter's father was demoted and transferred to a less prestigious role in a remote countryside office. Peter's family also faced social repercussions, becoming somewhat ostracized by their relatives due to the scandal. It was a regrettable series of events, but sometimes the consequences of one's actions are unavoidable. In the aftermath, I've been focusing on rebuilding and strengthening my relationship with my dad. We've been spending more quality time together, finding solace and reinforcement in each other's company after navigating such turbulent waters. The recent upheaval in my personal life has brought me even closer to my father, deepening my appreciation for everything he's done for me. One day, he invited me for a heart-to-heart conversation that took an unexpected turn. "Patricia, have you ever considered taking over the business?" He asked, his face a canvas of hope and earnestness. Caught off guard, I hesitated. "Are you suggesting?" I trailed off, unsure of where he was leading the conversation. He smiled slightly. "Why don't you work towards becoming the president of my company?" It was a significant proposal, and from his tone it was clear he believed I was ready for the challenge. "I'll do my best," I promised, a flurry of excitement and nervousness swirling within me. After reflecting on my recent experiences, I decided to focus on advancing my career at my dad's company, setting aside romantic pursuits for the moment. I aimed to prove to both myself and my father that I could excel and perhaps even become a great leader like him. Currently, I am fully committed to learning all aspects of the business. The work is demanding but immensely rewarding, and I'm eager to embrace every opportunity that comes my way. The ordeal at the wedding underscored just how unreasonable Peter's parents were, turning what should have been a beautiful celebration into a spectacle. Fortunately, since the marriage was never legally finalized, I avoided a potentially disastrous entanglement. Now free from marital commitments and in-law complications, I can concentrate solely on my professional ambitions. It's liberating to have found such clarity after a tumultuous period. I'm optimistic about the future and thrilled about the prospect of leading the company one day. Thank you for taking the time to follow my story to its conclusion. If you found something meaningful in it, please consider subscribing. I look forward to sharing more updates and insights with you in the future. "Why aren't you speaking to me?" I questioned, puzzled by the silence. "I've chosen not to engage with strangers," came the reply. Accepting this, I prepared to leave. Life at my husband's parents' house was challenging. I anticipated some resistance from my mother-in-law, but the cold shoulder from my father-in-law was unexpected. The atmosphere shifted notably when my sister-in-law, who openly disliked me, moved back in. Our once serene household turned tumultuous. Feeling undeterred, I muttered, "Don't assume I'll regret leaving," and swiftly packed my belongings. Just 2 days after my departure, chaos erupted in their home. My husband and I initially met at work. He was a sales representative, frequently visiting my office. As we collaborated more, I found myself drawn to his kindness and charm. While not conventionally attractive, his personality won me over, and it wasn't long before we started dating. During our conversations, he shared that he grew up in a stable family with loving parents and a sister. My background was starkly different. I had lost my parents young and was raised in an orphanage. It was a difficult past to discuss, but he listened empathetically and reassured me of his unwavering support. Soon after, he proposed, eager to advance our relationship into marriage. Upon meeting his parents and revealing my upbringing in an orphanage, they were supportive and dismissed any notion that it would impact our marriage. This acceptance warmed my heart, although my sister-in-law's reaction suggested she was less pleased. At the time, I brushed off her surprise, attributing it to the initial adjustments of our growing relationship. As our wedding approached, my husband and I contemplated living with his parents. Although it was a serious consideration, I chose to maintain my employment, especially since my husband was due for a transfer. This decision, though small, marked the beginning of many choices I would navigate in my new life as part of their family. Despite considering leaving my job to move with my husband, my career was on an upward trajectory, and I had recently been entrusted with more responsibilities. After discussing it, we agreed that he would relocate alone following our wedding. I relished the idea of enjoying our early days as newlyweds, even planning long weekend visits to ensure we had some quality time together. Moving in with my in-laws right after marrying felt overwhelming, but my husband seemed more at ease with the arrangement, likely hoping it would alleviate his mother's concerns. Since I had lost my parents at a young age, the prospect of being part of a family was appealing, and over time I had grown fond of my in-laws despite the challenges of balancing work and family life. One day, an unexpected situation arose that tested our otherwise content living situation. It began when my usually bossy and anxious mother-in-law was out shopping and I was preparing to clean on my day off. My father-in-law, appearing more frazzled than usual, pulled me aside for a private conversation. "What's going on?" I inquired, noticing his discomfort. He hesitated, then shared his dilemma. "I need to take some time off work," he confessed, explaining how workplace stress and health issues were taking a toll on him. He worried about my mother-in-law's reaction. She was generally caring but prone to anxiety and could be overly critical. For instance, when he had previously taken a sick day, she had chastised him for not being more career-focused like his co-workers. My father-in-law had always been slender, but I noticed he had lost even more weight recently. Despite needing a break, he feared my mother-in-law's reaction to any mention of time off, especially since they depended on the extra income from his overtime hours. Reluctantly, he revealed that he had been sneaking out to see a doctor, and now, faced with the necessity of a break from work, he was in a bind. "If I tell her, she might leave me," he confided, a hint of desperation in his voice. The thought pained me. My in-laws had welcomed me with open arms, regardless of my past in an orphanage, and I felt a strong desire to support them. "Okay, I'll send you money every month to cover your expenses," I offered, determined to help him through this rough patch. "I'm sorry you're going through this. Try to get better soon and return to work when you can." "Thank you so much," he replied, visibly relieved but still burdened by the secret he had to keep. Following our conversation, he continued to pretend to go to work, maintaining the facade to avoid upsetting my mother-in-law. This secret added a complex layer to our family dynamics, but I was committed to supporting him during this challenging time. While I quietly transferred money to my father-in-law's bank account for his living expenses, my mother-in-law never bothered to check her bank statements closely, so she remained unaware of the transfers. He maintained the illusion of going to work daily, but instead, he sought solace and recovery in a mental health clinic and long walks in the serene mountains. Gradually, his health and spirits improved, and it seemed he might soon return to work. However, an unexpected turn of events shook our household dynamics. After a significant argument with her husband, my sister-in-law returned to her parents' home. "There's nothing like being back home," she declared with relief, venting about her strained marriage. "I thought I'd lose my mind staying with that foolish husband of mine. I'll be staying here for a while, so you'll need to cook for me too." From our first family gathering, it was clear she harbored resentment towards me. At her wedding, she grimaced throughout and later criticized my appearance to my face, suggesting her brother could have married someone more attractive. She also made hurtful remarks about my upbringing in an orphanage, openly calling it an embarrassment. Given that she had moved out after her marriage, I initially thought her presence wouldn't be a permanent issue in my life. Her sudden return, driven by marital troubles, seemed temporary. However, her stay extended, and her attitude grew increasingly bitter, particularly towards my father-in-law. Despite this, my mother-in-law had always treated me kindly, and I believed she would defend me against any harsh comments from my sister-in-law. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. One day, after returning from work, I sensed a shift in my mother-in-law's demeanor. She seemed distant and cold. Concerned, I approached her. "Is something bothering you?" I asked gently. Her response was chilling. "Did you know you've been talking about me behind my back?" she accused. I was stunned. "I've never spoken ill of you. You've always been kind, and I'm grateful. Why would I say bad things about you?" I responded, confused and hurt. She left the room abruptly, leaving me to face my smirking sister-in-law in the hallway. "Looks like you're not in her good books anymore. Did your true colors finally show? Being from an orphanage, your background does matter, huh? It's best not to gossip about people," she taunted. "I haven't said anything bad about her," I defended myself, bewildered by the accusations. "Oh, the neighbors mentioned it when I came back. They said you've been speaking poorly of her all along," my sister-in-law claimed, adding a layer of mystery with her vague reference to unnamed neighbors. "I've never said any of those things. Stop making things up," I protested, but my words fell on deaf ears. "Oh, how disrespectful, Mom. She's calling me a liar and being mean to me," my sister-in-law exclaimed, twisting my words as she retreated to my mother-in-law's room. Following this incident, my sister-in-law's behavior worsened. She fabricated complaints, claiming I mistreated her by making her sleep in the hallway and insisting she take the last turn for bath since she was merely a guest. Each time she complained, I found myself explaining and defending my actions and words, trying to clear misunderstandings in a home that had once promised a new family and a fresh start. As time passed, it became evident that my mother-in-law was increasingly influenced by my sister-in-law's manipulative words. The situation grew more complicated when my sister-in-law prolonged her stay, and I couldn't help but wonder if she intended to make her visit permanent. This thought weighed heavily on me each day as I returned home from work, a place that once felt welcoming but now felt cold and silent. "I'm back," I announced softly upon entering the house, a stark contrast to the warm greetings I used to receive. The living room was quiet. "I'll start making dinner," I said, trying to keep the routine normal. To my surprise, as I walked into the dining area, I found my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law already eating sushi together. My sister-in-law smirked. "Oh, looks like someone who isn't family is here. You weren't planning on having sushi, were you?" My mother-in-law continued eating, her eyes glued to the television, ignoring my presence. "If you wanted sushi, you should have told me. I came straight home from shopping," I replied, trying to hide my hurt. "No one mentioned they wanted that," my sister-in-law retorted, dismissing me completely. Then, turning to our parents, she cheerfully added, "Hey, Mom, Dad, I went out with my friends today and brought back some delicious pudding. Let's eat together." They all indulged in the dessert, ignoring me entirely. Exhausted from work and the emotional strain, I retreated to my room, too weary to confront the blatant exclusion. The following day, my sister-in-law, preparing for another outing with friends, asked me to drive her to the station. "I can't. It's a weekday and I have work. Besides, we're not even going in the same direction and you want to leave around noon?" I explained, my patience wearing thin. "Just take the day off, it's fine. Your cute little sis-in-law just wants a ride. She hasn't had a chance to relax since she got married, right? Can't you be a bit nicer to her now?" she pleaded, trying to manipulate the situation. "With all due respect, didn't you go out with friends last night after getting a late call? It seems like you've been going out almost every day since you came back. I have work. Please take the bus or train," I countered, standing my ground. As my mother-in-law and sister-in-law whispered to each other, I left for work, determined not to let the situation escalate further. However, the tipping point came that evening. Work had delayed me and I arrived home late, soaked from the rain, groceries in hand, bracing for yet another cold reception. As expected, they were eating dinner without acknowledging me, continuing the pattern of the previous days. But what awaited me in the courtyard was far worse than any cold shoulder. In the middle of the garden, illuminated by the dim porch light, lay a pile of my belongings, my designer bag that I had bought with my first paycheck, shoes that were a birthday gift from my husband, and even my work computer, all drenched from the rain. My sister-in-law stood there, smirking triumphantly. Having the strangers' things in the house grosses me out, so I threw them out. Flaunting a designer bag like that, how arrogant of you. Stunned, I turned to my mother-in-law and father-in-law. Why didn't you stop her? Have I done something to make you believe her lies about me bad-mouthing you and bullying her? Aren't you upset with her for what she did? I pleaded for some sign of support. My mother-in-law avoided my gaze and remained silent. Then finally muttered, I can't talk to strangers. I can't be friendly with someone who's not family. Hurt and bewildered, I asked, Where's my father-in-law? He had been the one I supported during his time off, the only one who seemed to appreciate my efforts to blend into this family. As the silence stretched on, the harsh reality of my situation became painfully clear. I had been managing the finances in our household, a task I undertook out of gratitude for being welcomed into the family. But when conflict arose, I found myself longing for some support, especially from my father-in-law, whom I had financially supported during his time off. As the tensions escalated, I hoped he would stand by me, but when the moment came, he merely walked past without a word and retreated to his room. That's it for me, I murmured to myself, feeling a mix of resignation and resolve. My sister-in-law, seizing the opportunity to twist the knife further, sneered, Oh, are you upset? I'm sorry, not. Honestly, I never liked you from the start, coming from an institution and all. Just don't regret leaving. Good riddance, I retorted sharply. The decision was clear, it was time to leave. I quickly packed my belongings, aware that even though my father-in-law might worry about losing my financial support, he didn't make any move to stop me or defend me. His silence was the final straw. Driven by a need to escape the toxic environment, I didn't even discuss these issues with my husband before leaving. I suspected that my mother-in-law hadn't informed him of my sister-in-law's return or the ensuing conflicts. If he had known, surely he would have reached out, knowing the strained relations between us. But there had been no word from him on the matter, and a part of me feared that perhaps he too was influenced by his family's narrative. With a heavy heart, I got into my car and drove straight to my husband's new job location far away. All the while, doubts about his loyalty and our future together clouded my mind. Perhaps he sided with his family, I feared, and if so, could divorce be the only solution? Upon arriving at his apartment, he wasn't home yet, likely held up by end-of-month work. As I waited, the lights in the apartment signaled my arrival, and soon my husband walked in, surprised and delighted. What? You're here? You should have told me you were coming. I would have come back sooner. What a pleasant surprise. His face lit up with a genuine smile, a stark contrast to the coldness I'd faced at his family's home. The mix of relief and humiliation overwhelmed me, and tears started to form. What's wrong? Did I do something? Seriously, what's going on? He asked, his concern palpable. Taking a deep breath, I began to explain everything. I told him about supporting his father during his medical leave, his sister's return and prolonged stay, her lies that turned his mother against me, and the cold treatment that escalated to my belongings being left out in the rain. Through tears and pauses, I laid bare the painful reality of my days with his family. After hearing everything, my husband was apologetic. He regretted being too wrapped up in work to notice the signs and deeply lamented his family's behavior towards me. He assured me that I wouldn't have to return to that house or interact with them if I chose not to. His response provided a sliver of hope that perhaps, with his support, we could navigate through this turmoil together. Despite the possibility of forgiveness someday, my husband was resolute about severing ties with his parents and sister. He also firmly declared that he would cease all financial support to his father. That night, I felt an immense burden lift from my shoulders. The stress I had been carrying dissolved, and I slept soundly beside him for the first time in ages. After leaving my in-laws' house, I never returned. Commuting to my husband's out-of-state location wasn't feasible, but fortunately, I had already arranged with my company to work remotely. My job didn't require constant office presence, and many of my colleagues were also working from home, although I still needed to visit the office a few times each month. Some of my colleagues lived even farther away, so remote work was a well-established practice. Living under the same roof as my in-laws and enduring my sister-in-law's antagonism had kept me from truly enjoying married life. Now, as we settled into our new routine, it felt like we were finally starting our lives as newlyweds. I was setting up my remote workstation when unexpectedly my sister-in-law reached out to me. It turned out that the day after I left, it was my father-in-law's payday, a day my mother-in-law typically managed by transferring a portion of his paycheck to their household account. This time, however, she was unable to do so, and only then discovered that I had been supporting them financially during his time off. "Hey, why didn't you tell me you were covering the living expenses?" she demanded over the phone. "He asked me not to. He didn't want you to know, so I respected his wishes," I responded, keeping calm. "We're running out of money for living expenses, and there's no one here to cook or do laundry. The place is a mess. As his wife, you need to come back and take care of these things, and send money quickly." "How heartless!" she exclaimed. "I've already told you, I have no intention of going back to that house or being treated like your maid. Why should I help people who despise me, ruin my things, and treat me this way? Aren't you his wife? Without your help, we can't pay the bills or even shop," she continued, her voice desperate. "That's exactly why I'm saying it. I'm an outsider, so it's none of my business, right?" I replied, reflecting on her own words to her. I hung up the phone, ignoring her further complaints. Despite her and my mother-in-law's attempts to reach me with calls and messages, I stood firm in my decision. No longer would I allow myself to be drawn into their chaos or be manipulated by guilt. It was a liberating moment, affirming my resolve to start anew with my husband, free from the toxic ties that had once bound us. Despite the persistent calls from my in-laws, I chose to ignore them completely. However, when my husband returned from work and finally answered the phone, he addressed them with unwavering firmness. "I will never forgive how you treated her. I'm not sending her back to you, and I'm not coming back either. I don't see you as my family anymore. Leave my wife alone or you'll regret it." Considering how much my sister-in-law idolized her brother and my mother-in-law's dependency on him, this declaration must have come as a shock to them. A few days later, my father-in-law called, his voice laden with desperation. He explained how difficult life had become living with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law and begged me to resume the financial help. Although they had welcomed me into the family despite my orphanage background, their lack of support when I needed it most made me realize I owed them nothing. "I will never assist you again," I told him firmly and ended the call. Subsequently, in an act of sheer desperation, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law shamelessly showed up at my workplace. Knowing their potential for creating disturbances, I had already briefed my company about the situation, and security was alerted immediately. They caused a scene, demanding that the company force me to send money back home. When my husband found out, he was incensed and advised, "Report them to the police." My colleagues were incredibly supportive, encouraging me to focus on my work and my life with my husband, far removed from the toxic environment of my in-laws. The stress took its toll on my father-in-law, whose health declined significantly due to the pressure exerted by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Eventually, he had no choice but to quit his job. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law attempted to return to her husband's family, but he refused to take her back. The town quickly caught wind of her dramatic antics at my workplace, exacerbating her already troubled marriage, which promptly led to their decision to divorce. Without any support, my in-laws and sister-in-law moved to a modest apartment and started working part-time jobs to make ends meet. As for my husband and me, we were finally enjoying peaceful, fulfilling days together. Our home became a sanctuary of love and support, far from the strife we had endured. Recently, we received joyous news. We're expecting a child. The anticipation of meeting our baby fills us with happiness. We are eagerly awaiting this new addition to our family, cherishing every moment of this special time together. I recently purchased a high-rise condominium located conveniently right opposite the train station. Speaking of unexpected topics, why did he suddenly start talking about this? He did buy it after all, and it's truly impressive. The view from the condominium is stunning and the rooms are impeccably clean. However, I'm a bit lost here. It's shocking to discover that he secretly bought this luxurious condo while I was visiting my parents. Can you believe it? Where did he even get the money for such a purchase? Amidst my shock, he nonchalantly mentioned that he made the down payment with money from selling our previous place. He even declared he'd be moving in with his parents in their lovely home, leaving no room for me. He chose to live with his parents without discussing it with me and abruptly asked me to leave. I was so stunned. I couldn't find the words to respond. My name is Carol, and I am a 31-year-old housewife, currently 8 months pregnant. The anticipation of meeting my baby grows every day. My husband, Terry, is 2 years my senior at 33, and he has a career with a prominent company. We've been married for 4 years, and I was overjoyed to finally become pregnant after some difficulties with conception. However, I'm also quite nervous about experiencing childbirth for the first time. To find some peace and relaxation during this tense time, I often visit my in-laws' house. On one such visit, Terry's sister-in-law Madison asked me, "Carol, you're about to have a baby soon, huh? What do you think motherhood will be like?" Honestly, it still doesn't feel real to me yet. Madison is actually the wife of Terry's brother, and one of the main reasons I enjoy visiting my in-laws. While I don't really communicate with my brother-in-law, Madison and I have grown close. She's also a housewife and resides with my in-laws, which is especially important since my mother-in-law's mobility worsened 2 years ago. The family was concerned about leaving her alone, so Madison, being married to the eldest son, has taken on the role of caring for her during the day. Though my mother-in-law mainly uses a cane for walking and can manage quite well on her own, Madison, who has experience as a caregiver, stepped in to help without hesitation. When she learned about my mother-in-law's mobility issues, I was truly impressed by how decisively Madison handled the situation. My brother-in-law and Madison have a 4-year-old daughter, and Madison's experience as a mother provides me with some comfort and reduces my anxiety about pregnancy and childbirth. As the weeks went by, the arrival of my baby drew closer. With only a month left until my due date, I decided it was time to head to my parents' house to prepare for the birth. Despite the heaviness of my belly, I enjoyed shopping for baby items and daydreaming about our future together. It was refreshing to spend an extended period at my parents' house after such a long time. However, 3 days past my due date, I began to experience contractions. I tried reaching out to my husband, but he was unreachable, neither answering calls nor responding to texts. Initially, I worried he might be caught up at work or in some trouble, but as my labor pains intensified, there was no time left to ponder his whereabouts. The only thing on my mind was the impending birth of our child. Eventually, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Holding her in my arms for the first time brought an indescribable joy that overshadowed everything else. My husband, who had promised to be there, missed the birth. Exhausted from the delivery, I didn't have the energy to confront him immediately, so I sent him a text announcing the birth of our daughter and then fell asleep. When I awoke, I heard someone calling my name. "Are you still asleep? Huh, Terry? Is it morning already?" my husband cheerily asked as I opened my eyes to see him and his parents standing there. Despite my previous request for privacy post-delivery, here they were. "Why didn't you come here yesterday?" I asked him, irritation clear in my voice. He didn't respond directly to my question, which was frustrating. "It couldn't be helped," he replied casually, as if his absence and the sudden appearance of his parents were just minor issues. The situation was far from ideal, and I found myself grappling with a mix of emotions, from joy at my daughter's arrival to disappointment in my husband's actions. When I needed him most, my husband chose to have sushi with his parents, which he justified as a prior commitment. Even after their meal, he didn't show up at the hospital because he had been drinking and thought he'd be more of a nuisance than a help in his condition. It was disheartening to know he was out enjoying himself while I was in labor. When he finally visited, oblivious to my annoyance, he casually asked, "Where's our baby?" I told him she was in the nursery, a healthy baby girl. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law grimaced and muttered, "What a girl, such a useless wife," shocking me with her harsh words. My father-in-law chimed in with disappointment as well, calling both Madison and me pathetic. It hurt that instead of gratitude for enduring childbirth, I received criticism. Even Terry wasn't pleased. "Oh, damn it, I knew it was a girl but hoped a little for a boy," he said, echoing his parents' sentiments about wanting a grandson, especially since the first grandchild was also a girl. Their disappointment was palpable, yet to me, the gender of our child didn't matter. She was precious regardless. Amidst this turmoil, Terry sided with his parents, deepening my dismay. Although I was seething with anger, the physical and emotional toll of childbirth left me too exhausted to confront them further. Thankfully, a nurse, overhearing our conversation, intervened and asked them to leave, providing me with some much-needed peace. Since then, Terry hasn't visited us in the hospital. On the day of our discharge, I called my parents to pick us up and take us to their home, not wanting to return to a house filled with tension. I pondered over the changes in Terry. He used to be more caring when we first married. I suspected his transformation might be linked to a significant mistake at work 2 years ago, which led to a considerable loss for his company. Although his colleagues managed to mitigate the fallout, preventing him from facing direct consequences, the incident had derailed his career trajectory significantly. No matter how hard he worked, he couldn't regain his former standing. This setback might have contributed to his detachment and recent coldness, even at home. Adding insult to injury, one of his juniors at the company had now become his boss, a colleague who was initially less competent than him. This reversal of roles at work might be impacting his behavior at home, making him more distant and less empathetic than before. Reflecting on his past mistakes at work, I could see that Terry was struggling to cope. The pressure seemed to make him increasingly irritable about minor things. Despite my growing dissatisfaction with his behavior, I held on to hope that the birth of our baby might inspire him to change. Yet, it seemed he hadn't even tried to improve, leaving me deeply worried about our family's future. Amidst my anxiety, Terry suddenly called me. "Hey, when are you coming back? You've been at your parents' for nearly a month since the baby arrived." I wasn't ready to return home, but I replied, "Sorry, I'm coming home soon. It's time to start anew and get it together for our daughter." I then told him I had many baby items to bring back, and asked if he could help us with the transport. His response left me stunned. "No, you don't have to bring all that stuff back. I mean, I have other business with you. Maybe I should have just told you this over the phone rather than ask you to come back." Confused, I pressed him for clarity. Then he dropped another bombshell. "I bought a high-rise condo right in front of the station." I was bewildered. "What do you mean? Why are you bringing this up all of a sudden?" He continued, explaining how the condo offered a spectacular view and how clean it was. I struggled to follow his train of thought as he revealed he had moved out of our apartment and into this luxury condo while I was away. Where did the money come from? You shouldn't be able to afford a loan on your salary." While I panicked, he nonchalantly added, "I made a down payment by selling our house." I was in shock, barely processing the information as he delivered these facts piecemeal, adding to my confusion. "What do you mean you sold our house? Where are your parents living now?" His excitement was evident as he quickly responded, "Daddy and Mommy are living with me in the condo now. I'm going to live with them in this great house, so I don't need a parasite like you around." I was floored by his declaration that he had decided to live with his parents without my consent and was now effectively kicking me out. Speechless, I couldn't muster a response as he abruptly began referring to his parents in childlike terms and announced that they were all living together in the condo. Adding insult to injury, he then insulted me, saying, "You're cocky for just a housewife. You're useless without my salary. Besides, you've been nothing but a couch potato these days." His words cut deep, reflecting a harshness and disdain that left me questioning not only his love, but what our future held. His sudden, drastic changes in behavior and decisions about our lives without consultation were not only shocking, but deeply hurtful. During my pregnancy, when I was dealing with severe morning sickness and busy with preparations for our child's arrival, my husband showed no sympathy. After our baby was born, he cruelly remarked that I was useless because the baby wasn't a boy. He even mentioned that his parents thought it would be better for him to be with a younger woman who could bear a son rather than staying with me. Additionally, he told me his parents no longer wanted to live with my brother and his wife, indicating a lot of family tension. He informed me that he had stored my belongings in a storage room and instructed me to collect them soon. The conversation turned even colder as he bluntly stated that he had sent me divorce papers and expected me to file them promptly. Then, without waiting for any response, he hung up. I was left in shock, struggling to understand how I had ended up married to such a heartless person. Despite feeling regret over my choice, I knew I had to pull myself together for the sake of our daughter. After some time to reflect, I resolved to sever ties with him and start anew. I decided not to let him dictate my life any longer. Divorce, bring it on, I thought to myself, determined to show him that he would regret this more than me. My parents were furious when I explained the situation and immediately supported me in taking legal action. As soon as I received the divorce papers, I signed and filed them. Half a month later, my husband unexpectedly showed up at my parents' home, angry about a substantial withdrawal from his bank account. He slammed his bank book on the table and demanded an explanation. Calmly, I responded, "Haven't you heard of the division of property? That's what this is. The bank account is in my name and I won't give you a cent." Surprised by my assertiveness, he retorted, "You couldn't have earned that much money. Remember, your salary dropped because of your mistake at work and you think you can claim this money?" I stood my ground. "I've been working from home and managed to match your salary. Now we're going to divide our assets, especially since you're the one who wanted a divorce." He was taken aback. "You're kidding me," he said in disbelief. That's when my father, who had remained silent, spoke up. "If you want to dispute this further, we can settle it in court. How dare you treat my daughter this way?" The situation had escalated beyond mere personal grievances. It was now a matter of legal and financial assertion. I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine and protect my and my daughter's future. I deeply regret that my daughter had to experience such turmoil because of Terry. One day, when he tried to confront us again, my father, who is a police officer, gave him a stern look that scared him off, and he quickly left our home. That was the moment I finally severed ties with Terry for good, and we also resolved the division of assets. Since then, I've been living with my parents, focusing on raising my daughter. Parenting has become more familiar to me, and my daughter's adorable nature makes every day joyful. Life has been good, filled with the happiness that only a child can bring. A few months into our new life, I started receiving persistent calls from an unknown number. Initially, I ignored them, thinking they might be work-related, but the caller was persistent. Eventually, I answered, and to my surprise, it was Terry. "Hello, Carol," he said hesitantly. "What do you want? How are you doing?" I asked, not interested in small talk. "Can you come back here? I'm having trouble paying my mortgage for the condo, and I might get kicked out soon," he confessed. "Oh, so you're short on cash?" I replied, not particularly sympathetic. "Yes, I've used up all my savings. Dad injured his back and had to quit his job, and Mom has been spending recklessly, bragging to her friends about our life in the condo," he explained, his voice filled with desperation. I wasn't surprised. Terry had never managed his finances well, and without his father's income and his mother's spending habits, it was clear he couldn't afford the condo's expenses on his own. "My bank balance is zero, and I've been told I need to leave if I can't pay by next week. Please come back, Carol. We loved each other once," he pleaded. After a brief laugh, I responded calmly, "Give me a break. You just want to use me whenever it suits you. You're hoping I'll come back not just for love, but for my salary and to handle all the housework, right?" There was a pause. "Also, remember when you called me a parasite? Would I not just be in the way now?" He tried to backtrack. I just chose the wrong words back then. I pressed on. "What about Madison and your brother? Are they still with your parents?" He sighed. "They moved out and are living on their own now. They had a big argument with our parents. My brother wanted Dad to live more sensibly, but that just made things worse. Terry's situation seemed dire, but it was a product of his own choices, a tangled mess of financial and familial errors. It was clear he was looking for an easy way out by trying to pull me back into his life. However, I had moved on, focused on a better, healthier future for myself and my daughter, free from the chaos and manipulation of my past with Terry. Then my brother-in-law, who is usually so composed, finally had enough. I heard he stormed out after telling his parents he'd cut ties with them if they continued to disrespect his wife, Madison. It's heartening to know he stands up for her. He seems like a decent guy. As for Terry, his plea for me to return was met with disbelief. "Come back to you? Are you serious? I'm already overwhelmed just taking care of our daughter. I don't have the energy to deal with people like you." I couldn't help but comment on how odd it was for him to still call his parents daddy and mommy. It's just not suitable for someone his age. He tried to backtrack, suggesting I bring our daughter over to live with them. "Weren't you planning to live with her when you first asked me to come back?" I questioned. He fumbled, clearly having forgotten his lies. "I would never let my daughter live with such a despicable father. Don't ever call me again, and if you show up, I'll have my dad arrest you," I warned him. His response was a feeble sound, possibly recalling my father's intimidating presence, but I hung up and blocked his number. Not long after, he tried to reach me with a new number, so I changed mine to cut him off completely. Later, I reconnected with Madison, who reached out to apologize for her silence. She explained that they had moved to the countryside and struggled with setting up the internet. Madison and her family now lived in a tranquil rural area, and she invited me over. I visited her for the first time and was charmed by the serene natural setting, an ideal place for a child to grow up. During my visit, my brother-in-law shared that Terry and his parents were eventually evicted from their condo due to unpaid debts and were now struggling financially, a stark contrast to their previous lifestyle. It was a bit of poetic justice. Meanwhile, I've been working from home and living comfortably at my parents' house. The flexibility of my job allows me to work from anywhere, so I spent a few relaxing days at Madison's house. I considered the possibility of moving closer to Madison in the future, hopeful for what lies ahead for my daughter and me. Reflecting on the whole ordeal, buying a high-rise condo on a whim while your wife is pregnant seems absurd unless you're quite wealthy. It's strange to take such a risk on a normal income. In any case, I'm relieved she's rid of such an unsavory husband. I hope to continue enjoying my peaceful life, possibly relocating near Madison and her family, where everyone gets along well, and fostering a happy environment for my daughter. Recently, I was shocked to learn that there had been a significant fire at Evertrust Company, where my husband, Richard, works. At that moment, I felt as if I had been struck on the head. Overwhelmed with concern, I immediately called Richard, fervently hoping he was safe. The phone rang, and when I finally heard his voice answering, my relief was immense. Excitedly, I asked, "Richard, where are you? Are you safe?" My voice was louder than I intended due to my anxiety and relief. However, Richard seemed annoyed by my loud tone and curtly responded, "What's the matter with you? You're talking so loud. I'm at work. Don't call me while I'm working," before abruptly hanging up. Although he didn't seem to be involved in the fire, his reaction was oddly dismissive. My name is Sarah. I'm 35 years old, and nursing is a significant part of my life. I got married to Richard 4 years ago when I was 30, just as I was nearing the end of my 20s. We met through a mutual acquaintance and quickly connected, leading to a blissful marriage, and we've been living in company housing provided by his employer. 4 years into our marriage, we haven't had children yet, but I'm hopeful about building a happy family with Richard. While he can be self-centered, he's generally a kind and loving man who makes me feel secure. However, lately he seems overly preoccupied with work, often bringing tasks home even on his days off, which leaves him visibly exhausted. Richard's detachment extends to our evenings together. After dinner, he often sits on the sofa, ostensibly watching TV, but he's mostly engrossed in his phone, using the television merely as background noise. When I attempt to engage him in conversation, his responses are minimal, usually just a yeah or an oh, making me wonder if I've done something to upset him. This recent shift in his behavior is puzzling and somewhat concerning to me. Choosing to believe that Richard was just overwhelmed by his demanding job, I decided to do my part in making things a bit easier for him. If he was indeed that exhausted, I figured I could at least ensure he had a warm lunch and a hearty dinner waiting for him every day. I made sure each meal was nutritious and balanced to help him through his long days. Then, an unexpected change threw a wrench in our routine. The day before, a colleague called, asking if I could swap my night shift for a day shift. This sudden change meant I'd be home in the evenings, so I planned to inform Richard. However, amid the hustle of the new shift, I only managed to email him about the switch on the day itself. I told him not to worry about dinner as I'd prepare it once I was home. But strangely, I didn't receive any response from him. I thought he must have been swamped at work, so I focused on my duties. Even after my shift ended, there was still no word from him. This was unusual because Richard typically replied promptly to my messages during his breaks, often using emojis to keep the tone light. But this time, he only read my message and didn't reply. I wondered if he was just buried under work, or if this was a sign of something more concerning, a shift that sometimes happens after years of marriage. Feeling a bit down, I stopped at the supermarket on my way home. Despite the cold weather, I was determined to make a warm, one-pot meal for us. I picked up all the necessary ingredients and prepared them, ready to start cooking as soon as Richard walked through the door. However, he didn't come home at his usual time of 6 p.m. The hours ticked by, and it was already 9 p.m. by the time he arrived. As he entered, I greeted him, trying to keep the mood light. "Welcome back, you're home late? Did you have to do some overtime work?" My voice carried a mix of relief and concern, hoping for a simple explanation. "Yeah, but did you have to suddenly switch to the day shift?" Richard asked as he entered the kitchen. Yes, a coworker had an emergency, and I was a bit late in telling you about the change," I explained, feeling the tension between us. "I see. I guess you couldn't help it," Richard replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "But it's a bit annoying that you only told me today. I might have made plans to go out for a drink or something." "You're right, I'm sorry," I responded, turning on the stove to heat the pot. "Oh, you haven't eaten yet?" Richard noticed the setup. "No, I thought I'd wait for you," I said, hoping he'd appreciate the gesture. "Well, thanks, but next time you don't have to wait for me," he said. His words stung a bit. I had hoped for a cozy evening together. I sighed quietly as I waited for the hot pot to boil. Once it started to simmer, I served Richard's portion and then mine. I was famished after waiting all evening for him. The hot pot was delicious, and I began to enjoy it, savoring each bite. Then I noticed that Richard wasn't eating much. "What's wrong? You don't seem to be eating much," I remarked. "Oh, yes," he muttered, seeming distracted. Then he admitted I worked late and a junior colleague bought me a rice bowl at work, so I'm not hungry. Okay, but you should have told me that before," I said, feeling a mix of disappointment and frustration. "I mean, you could have sent a quick message before I started cooking." I think Richard realized I was upset because he quickly suggested, "Okay, then put all my portions in the fridge. I'll eat it tomorrow morning." He tried to lighten the mood, but the atmosphere was already strained. After a few minutes of silence, Richard got up from the couch and suddenly announced, "I'm going for a walk." That was unusual. His abrupt decision to leave the house after such an interaction left me pondering what was going on with him lately. When I expressed my concern about his sudden desire for a walk, Richard explained, "I haven't been getting enough exercise lately, and with all the late work hours, I just need a change of pace." He began preparing to head out, and I was left feeling a bit hollow, sitting alone at the dining table with the hot pot in front of me. Eventually, I decided to put my portion in the fridge, feeling slightly overfed and realizing that Richard and I hadn't spent much quality time together lately. I suggested joining him for a walk, hoping it might give us a chance to reconnect. However, Richard declined my offer, saying, "It's not good for you to move around right after eating. Besides, I need to take a long walk alone tonight." With that, he left the house by himself. His behavior struck me as odd. So driven by a gut feeling, I discreetly followed him from a distance. Despite the cool evening air, Richard walked with an unusual pep in his step. He eventually stopped near a park, quite a distance from our home. There, he seemed to be waiting for someone, frequently checking his phone. A few minutes later, a car pulled up. Richard walked over and began chatting casually with the driver. Curiosity got the better of me, and I moved closer to get a better look. Through the car window, I could see a woman with long curly hair and shiny lipstick, laughing joyfully as Richard climbed into the passenger seat. The sight was a punch to the gut. I couldn't help but think he was having an affair. Just as I was processing the scene, the car drove off with them. I stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Not long after, Richard texted me, claiming he had unexpectedly run into an acquaintance and would be home late. His explanation felt far too convenient, and deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The trust I had in him was shaken as I struggled to grasp the reality of the situation. He had told me he wasn't hungry because he had already eaten, yet it was past 3 a.m. when my husband finally came home. He didn't even realize I was awake as he stumbled in, seeming tipsy, and headed straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. Since that night, he often stayed late at work, especially when I was on the day shift. Synchronizing our days off had always been a challenge, but now it felt nearly impossible. Recently, he was not only working late, but also on his supposed days off. I couldn't shake the suspicion that he might be meeting the woman I had seen with him that night. Driven by doubt, I went online to look for detective agencies. After some searching, I submitted an investigation request to the most reputable one I could find. I felt guilty for going behind his back, but I reasoned that if the investigation cleared him, I could fully trust him again. Waiting for the results of the investigation was excruciating. My husband was as reserved as ever, and every time I looked at him, the image of that woman haunted me. I was desperate for clarity. Then, an unexpected event happened. It was a busy Saturday at the hospital where I worked the day shift. My husband was supposedly working on his day off. As I focused on my tasks, trying not to dwell on my personal issues, the distant sound of fire truck sirens caught my attention. The noise grew louder and more urgent, and soon it wasn't just one fire truck but several speeding by. A sense of unease crept over me, turning into worry as two of my colleagues returned to the ward with grave expressions. They were discussing the emergency, a large fire nearby. "You mean the fire?" I asked, trying to catch up with their conversation. "Yes, that's right," they confirmed. It was a major fire at EverTrust Company. At that moment, the shock hit me like a physical blow. EverTrust Company was where my husband worked. The distress of the situation overwhelmed me as I considered the danger he might be in. Learning that the fire was at EverTrust Company where my husband worked filled me with an immediate sense of dread. I quickly explained the situation to my colleagues and rushed to call Richard, hoping against hope that he was safe. Despite the recent tension between us, I never failed to see him off each morning as he left for work. With a heavy heart, I dialed his number, praying fervently that he had not been caught in the blaze. The phone rang, and soon Richard's voice came through, a sound that momentarily lifted my spirits. "Hello, Richard, are you safe?" I asked, my voice louder than intended in my relief. But instead of reassurance, his response was curt and irritated. "What's the matter with you? You're talking so loud. I'm at work. Don't call me while I'm working." And then the call was abruptly ended. Confusion and anger started to set in. There was a massive fire with fire trucks dispatched to the scene. It was impossible for him to be working normally under those circumstances. His cold demeanor and strange response made me wonder if he had even gone to work or if something else was going on. As my worry for his safety turned into suspicion about his fidelity, I couldn't help but think about all the mornings I had seen him off. Was he using that time to meet someone else? By the time I reached home, my mind was made up. I needed to leave and start afresh. As I began packing my belongings, I checked the mailbox and found that the results from the detective agency had arrived. It seemed timely to take these with me as I left the house that no longer felt like a home. My parents came over to help me pack, and I arranged for a moving contractor to expedite the process. Amid the packing, it dawned on me that Richard was probably unaware that I knew the truth about his affairs, and it was likely he was with his lover at that very moment. I packed up my furniture and the appliances that had been with me since my single days. The room quickly emptied, becoming a shell of the home it once was. As I stood there looking around at the nearly empty space, I realized how much I had changed and how much I needed to move on from this chapter of my life. I had grown completely detached from the life I once had in that house. With resolve, I moved my belongings to my parents' house and began searching for a new place to live on my own. The next day, my husband finally reached out, his voice filled with confusion and annoyance. "Hey, what's going on? Most of your stuff is gone." "I've moved out," I replied calmly. "What the hell were you thinking? When are you coming back? What about my food? What about the house chores?" His questions were all too telling, focusing solely on what I did for him. Hearing his words, I was stunned but not entirely surprised. "Is that all you think about when it comes to me?" I asked, the disappointment heavy in my voice. Our conversation brought back the memory of the fire at his company, a day he was supposedly caught up at the office, yet he seemed too carefree considering the circumstances. "Why don't you find another woman to handle all that?" I challenged, unable to keep my composure. "What are you talking about?" he replied, genuinely confused. "You were with a woman named Kelly today, weren't you?" "Huh? What are you talking about? I was working at the office." "Oh, at the office? How long did you work today?" I pressed, my suspicion growing. It was a busy day. Even though I was supposed to be off, I worked until late in the evening, he claimed. "That's why I was so surprised that you moved out," he added, trying to sound bewildered by my actions. "Why don't you stop lying already?" I countered sharply. "You lied about going to work, right?" "I wasn't lying. I was working. What's going on?" His voice wavered between frustration and confusion. "How can you work until the evening when there was a fire at your office during the day? When I called you, several fire trucks had been dispatched to your company. They were there to put out a fire that broke out at your office. That's why I called you. I wanted to know if you were okay. You told me not to call you when you're at work, acting as if there was no fire. His silence following my words spoke volumes, confirming my doubts as the reality of the situation sunk in deeper. The conversation laid bare the fissures in our relationship, making the distance between us more palpable than ever. After uncovering the truth about the affair through a detective agency, I held irrefutable evidence that left no room for my husband to deny his actions. I informed him sternly, "There's no way for you to get away with this. From now on, you'll need to communicate through my lawyer." As expected, he pleaded for forgiveness, repeatedly apologizing for his betrayal. However, my feelings for him had long since faded. "I'm sorry, but there's no way to fix this. I'm hanging up now," I said, cutting off any further attempts for reconciliation. I promptly met with my lawyer, demanding a divorce and alimony. The proceedings moved swiftly. With the solid evidence at hand, the divorce was finalized, and he, along with his accomplice from work, a junior colleague, was ordered to pay a significant amount in alimony. The affair had not only personal repercussions, but professional ones as well. Once the news of their relationship spread throughout the company, particularly under the dramatic circumstances of the fire at the workplace, it sparked widespread disdain among their peers. Both my husband and his affair partner found themselves receiving cold stares and harsh judgments from colleagues, a social penalty for their actions which seemed to deeply embarrass them. Meanwhile, I moved into a new apartment and began embracing my independence. The stability of my nursing career gave me the comfort to take things slowly without rushing into another relationship. I was enjoying my newfound solitude, appreciating the peace that came with it. Finding out about my husband's affair, especially during the chaos of the fire at his company, felt like a harsh twist of fate. Yet, in a way, it expedited the inevitable. His actions deserved the consequences they brought. Now, as I settled into my single life, I looked forward to the possibility of meeting someone genuine in the future, but with no hurry, enjoying each moment of my life as it came.